All right, so what you're looking at right here is my new to me BKD Jetta. And that is right, it's a BKD, not a 1.9 TDI, which is mainly what I've been dealing with lately. I've bought this one blown up with a timing belt that had failed, the tensioner had pulled itself out of the head. I'd say whoever installed it didn't do a proper job. And I bought it not running for a very well price, found a marketplace motor, and now it's a running and driving very, very cheap car. And I've bought this thing with the intentions of, surprise, surprise, changing up my plans, making this the fast car, a BKD modified. I'm going to pull the spare motor with the head that's cooked apart in today's video and put that in eventually once I build it all up to replace this engine. And I'm planning to do rods, John Deere turbo, etc. with a DQ500 and 4Motion and make this a proper fast car. The silver Jetta is still my current daily driver. However, the turbo has started letting out some white smoke. The motor doesn't have, I don't know if it's just the turbo or what's going on, but something doesn't sound 100% right. And if I replace that turbo, I'm not putting a standard unit on it. So the AXR here, which came out of my silver Polo with all those goodies on it, might end up in the Jetta. Also, that Polo is no longer. It is back to stock and sold. So that vehicle you will not see anymore. So what you're looking at right here is the BKD that came in that black Jetta, which is what I plan to be stripping down in today's video. This will be the first time I've ever pulled a motor completely apart. So it's going to be a bit of a learning curve for me. Obviously, the general overall idea of what you're doing is pretty self-explanatory. But I'm going to try and strip it right down and pull the head off it today, which I've never done before. I've only replaced head studs with the motor still completely together. So my intention is to start with the accessories on the front. I'm going to start by removing the AC pump, the alternator and their support bracket, as well as the tensioner, and then I'll start removing the inlet manifold. Now you may have noticed that I struggled getting that bracket off, and that's actually because one of the pulleys actually goes through the timing cover. So that was why I had to thread that bolt back in to remove it. With that removed, that cover comes off easily. So I'm going to now start moving on to, I'm thinking probably inlet manifold now. So I've decided I'm going to change this video into a full-blown strip down of a BKD, and I'm going to just film the process as I do it with zero experience working on these motors. So let's remove this EGR pipe, remove the anti-shutter valve and the EGR valve, and get that inlet manifold off. Alright, so I've now got all the bolts removed out of the inlet manifold, and that final one that's in the EGR port, basically the inlet manifold, the one that's actually internal, is exceptionally hard to get to / find because of the amount of soot that's mixed with the EGR gases and the PCV valve, what do you call, like there's particles of oil mixing with particles of soot, and it gums everything up, which is why you delete the EGR system. Anyway, enough waffling. The manifold's actually unbolted right now and it's ready to come off, so let's give it a crack. Alright, and that's as much of the stuff off the front of the engine that I want to strip off for now. The only thing left is the thermostat housing, which is two 10mm bolts. I'll pull that off and we'll move our way around to the back. Alright, so I now have the entire accessory side of the motor stripped down. There's nothing left there to remove. The only thing left on the front that I'm going to pull off is the oil cooler, and then we'll take our attention around to the gearbox side and the back of the engine to pull off the turbo and tandem pump and all that sort of stuff. Alrighty, and now we have the oil cooler off. It's time to spin the motor around and we'll start working on the back of it and the gearbox side, getting that turbo and EGR cooler, all the assemblies removed. Alrighty, and those with a keen eye will realise that I haven't recorded for the last probably half an hour. I've pulled the tandem pump off, I've pulled the coolant flange that goes there off, and that plastic inside, that's actually brittle, so I'll be replacing that part. I've also pulled the EGR cooler off and the turbo. I've loosened the rocker cover bolts and I'm ready to remove the rocker cover for my first internal look into this motor. I'm hoping that, well, my plan is to build this motor up from scratch with rods and pistons and brand new head and all that, so I'm hoping that it shows a good service history record of the past. The books inside the car had some relatively long intervals, however I know these don't suffer from cam wear like the 8-valve 1.9s do. So hopefully I don't see anything crazy when I pull the head off this. But anyway, I'm going to get the camera up a little bit higher and pull this rocker cover off for my first look inside the motor. Alrighty, it's time we rip it off. I'm going to imagine this is going to be quite stuck on there because this is probably the first time that this rocker cover has been off in the last 10, 15 years. Okay, that was nice and easy. Let's have a look. Yeah, okay, so look, a little bit gummed up inside. Nothing out of the ordinary though. Now this motor hasn't ran for at least a few months, so everything has had time to sort of drain back where it needs to. Cams show a bit of wear, there's a bit of sludge up the top, but overall not terrible. I'm gonna get to pulling out some more of the internal parts of the engine and we'll continue from there. Alright, and surprise, surprise, yet again, I have had a big skip in the video. Well, really all I've pulled is the rocker off the top that holds the cams down and pulled the cams themselves out, pulled the injectors out, all that's relatively straightforward stuff. I've left the loom in the basically the support that goes over the top that holds the cams in. I just didn't feel like that was necessary to pull out. I'll probably get a new loom for that as some of the plastic connectors were already broken, so clearly someone's been in here before. But anyway, the only thing left now to do is pull the head bolts. Once they're out, the head can come off and we can have a look inside this motor and see the carnage. Alright, and there we have it with the head off the BKD, and surprisingly enough, there's actually no obvious signs of the valves hitting the pistons. And to be completely honest with you, I almost think that if I had tapped the head out and chucked a new stud in it for the tensioner and put a new belt on it, I honestly think this thing probably would have ran. Albeit it did have stop leak and stuff going through the motor, so it's highly likely that there is some further damage, whether that's the EGR cooler leaking or the head does have a crack. Among a quick look at the head, I actually couldn't find any damage to it, but let's go have a quick look at that. Having a look at the head though, there are some obvious signs of either poor maintenance on the coolant. This did have the wrong coolant in it, it was green, plus maybe that head gasket in a can type of thing has led to some blockages in the coolant jackets, but at least, there's no real obvious signs that the block's toast. Once I get the pistons out, we'll clean it right down and have a look at the bores and check them and make sure they're all still in tolerance, and then I'd say this block is still going to be good to go for a build. So here is the head, and as I said before, there are very limited signs of valves absolutely smashing pistons. All the valves are still in place. There's no actual witness marks on anything as far as I've been able to see. I'll get the torch out and have a closer look between like the glow plugs and the valves and the injector in the valves, see if there's any cracks in the block there, because that's pretty common. But other than that though, there's no obvious signs of this head even being completely toast. Obviously, if they've had the wrong coolant in it and some head gasket in a can, there's clearly been a coolant leak somewhere, or stop leak in the radiator probably is more so to the point. Whether that was the water pump leaking, which did look relatively brand new, or whether the EGR cooler was leaking or the head was leaking, I don't know. I don't know the motor. It never ran. I've never seen it run, but it's going to serve for a good purpose here, for a rebuild, to make some pretty serious power. It does have 273,000 Ks on it, and the oil inside the head says that it's had a pretty poor oil change life, but I'm going to be replacing all the bearings and everything inside the motor anyway, so it's really not that big of a deal as long as the block is still in tolerance. But again, as with the block, you can see in the coolant jackets there, I've actually removed some of the stuff that was stuck in there, but they're rusty as well, which does indicate the wrong coolant or poor coolant, or basically tap water being put in there. You won't get this if you put in the correct coolant and change it every couple of years. But with that being said though, that basically completes my teardown of the BKD. This is the furthest I've ever delved into a motor. I've never ever had a head off like this before, but I'm going to be pulling it completely to pieces and starting from scratch with a build up from basically a bare block. So it's going to be something awesome, something different to do. It's a project that I'm really excited to do. This won't be a very quick project. Time and budget is limited at the moment with life circumstances. But basically, that's what I'm going to be doing. There'll probably be another mini project in the near future before this one even goes through. But at least I've got it all apart, and we can basically diagnose what parts that we need to order and go from there. So if you've enjoyed this video of me diving into a motor further than I ever have before, chuck a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, because again, you're going to be seeing this thing get rebuilt in the future. And with that said, catch you in the next video.